I'm going to hand over to Victoria Haskins, who is a professor and historian of gender and colonialism at the University of Newcastle, where she directs the Puri Global Indigenous History Center. And Victoria has published widely on the history of domestic service and colonization, particularly Indigenous domestic service, including colonialism and male domestic service across the Asia-Pacific, and colonization and domestic service. She is lead series editor for the Bloomsbury academic series, Empires, Other Histories. Vicki will be heading off to the US soon, next year, for a distinguished scholar fellowship with CUNY Graduate Center's Advanced Research Collaborative, where she will be researching a project on the traveling nursemaids of the British Empire. Aside from her major achievements, contributions, and accomplishments, including being President of Senate, outgoing President of Senate, I'd like to say on a personal note that Vicki is the most generous colleague, and I greatly value her professional insight as a peer, mentor, but also her friendship. And I'm ever so pleased then to have Vicki talking to the book. Thank you.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. I'm just got the mic. Have I got the mic in the right place?
I think so.
Yes. Thank you very much. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking on the lands of the Aboriginal people from this area, Moolabimba, the place of sea ferns, and of course it wasn't very long ago that they were invaded, and their culture and people continue to live on today. So when Penny asked me to launch the new book she'd just co-edited with colleagues Julia Coffey, Rosalind Gill and Akani Kanai, I was honoured and really delighted. As a colleague of Penny's, I've got to know her since she came here to our university, which Sue was just telling me it's 7 years ago. I was trying to work out how long ago it was. And we really clicked as soon as we met. She came here to take up the Global Innovation Chair of Equity. And so I count Penny as a dear friend now, who I admire very much, both on a personal and professional level. And I'm also tremendously admiring of her co-editors, and I'm proud of the association that they all have in one way or another with our university. I think we, as a university, have to be really proud of the co-editors of this book. So let me tell you about this excellent and important edited collection on gender in an era of post-truth populism. As Sue said, it's very timely indeed. We're seemingly confronted every day, everywhere, by attacks upon truth-telling that emanate from a political and economic agenda to harness the considerable power that can be extracted from right-wing outrage, and I would venture too from left-wing outrage that is triggered in response. We seem to be living in a time when the shock jock reigns supreme. I use the term jock advisedly too. Gender's embedded in these attacks, which are often positioned against women and against any idea of shifting from a rigid gender binarism built not just on extreme difference between the two genders, but also an oppressive hierarchy of difference where women are subordinate and await men's pleasure, and men are encouraged to be furious and belligerent. And a lot of that heat and fury seems to be emanating from the US, from a university-centric perspective, and this collection is very much directly engaged with what's happening at universities. I look in disgust at the rise of an organised, billionaire-funded organisation that some of you may have heard of called Campus Reform. And this specialises in inciting students to deluge academics who are deemed to be speaking out of place. A survey of 338 individuals who'd been so targeted that was reported earlier this month found that they were targeted over a variety of liberal positions, which is the US kind of word for progressive. Now, the majority of those were targeted for their comments on race. and black academics were disproportionately targeted over a variety of comments, but those who commented on, black academics who commented on Antifa, Black Lives Matter or Palestine were especially subjected to violent threats. Now, this campus reform group is a white supremacist and extreme right group, as you might have guessed. Just hang it up. They've heard me speaking. It's them. The place is bugged. White supremacist and extreme right group. Disturbingly, but also sadly, unsurprisingly, less than half of those who were surveyed had received support from their universities, and 12% had faced disciplinary actions themselves from their universities. So their own institution piled on. Now, we also know that the movement for free speech in universities, which should and can be a very good thing, is used in the US particularly to stifle education and to stifle productive and constructive debates. In Florida this year, the state legislature passed legislation popularly known as the Stop Woke Act that blocks academic instruction and workplace training that espouses, quote, I'm quoting here, that espouses, promotes, advances, inculcates or compels critical ideas about race. So race is front and centre of these goings-on, but in true intersectional fashion, gender is inextricably entangled in it. For instance, the resignation in September this year of a beleaguered sociology professor at an American university, this is Binghamton, after a campus reform student member complained about gender discrimination in a course guide. And this student was a white male student. So the professor had stated in her guide that she would prioritise the contributions of non-white and or female students in her class discussions. What was the course? It was a first-year course on social change. So there's something terribly Orwellian about the way that this discourse is premised upon attacking something by claiming to defend it. And, you know, Sue's spoken about that. When I was reading through the book, I was thinking, what is that thing? So I did a bit of Googling to find it. And what I was looking for is the word from 1984, doublethink, that was described by Winston Smith. And I'll just quote him. This is Winston Smith from 1984. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety. Consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis that you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. And doublethink isn't the only echo from 1984 here, though I did go like, yes, this is what it is, it's doublethink. But there's also newspeak, that grossly stunted language that deliberately diminishes the range of thought. And particularly compelling for me as a historian, the awfulness of the memory hole, where anything embarrassing or incriminated can be wiped from the public record and history revised. Of course, it's not just the US where we're seeing this, that the US gets the full glory of the limelight, but it's across the globe. Attacks upon social justice agendas and rights advocacy in all corners and all its various aspects, always with gender in it. In Australia here, we've got to comprehend this against a backdrop of the unfinished business of denied First Nations sovereignty, that is colonisation, attended by continuing deaths in custody, violence against women, and massive disadvantage, alongside, at the same time, the increasing call for truth-telling and the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Is this right-wing doublethink a defensive backlash against a rising tide of progressivism? It's possible. It's kind of like optimistic and hopeful. And it would be nice to dismiss these ratbags as dinosaurs and Looney Tunes. Though it is hard not to be disheartened by the way that this extremism can seemingly be, and is being in the digital age, harnessed for populism. And what concerns me is it the misogyny and the gender identity anxiety that's built into so much of this triggering outrage that helps account for its mass appeal? Is that where it's finding its mass appeal, in its misogyny and the fear of breaking down the gender binary? And what are we to make of this? And this is where I think that gender in an era of post-truth populism is positioned at the sharpest edge of scholarship. So there's an urgency to the book, as Sue said, in the way it sets out the predicaments for scholars and educators engaging with intersectional feminist theory and activism, and also suggests tools and pedagogical strategies to push back. I'm particularly taken with some of the points that come together in the editor's conclusion. In taking these insights seriously, they write, we suggest a need to strategically and selectively refuse debates that are predominantly constructed in terms of truth and falsehood. This is not a question of dispensing with accuracy, but rather focusing on the investments and effects of such certain pronouncements. We need to also pay attention to the relationality that shapes the effects of truth claims. It is imperative that feminist activism and scholarship responding to post-truth does not unwittingly impede decolonising and democratising processes. In this landscape, critical pedagogical strategies are more important than ever. And as I've read through these diverse chapters and themes in the collection, I've been imagining particularly how undergraduate students can find in here ways of thinking about the strange and challenging world that we find ourselves in today. And I think it's also going to be extremely useful for educators grappling with these issues, not just in their teaching and their research, but in their everyday work lives. It's really, it's a book that's good to think with. And this book is, like Penny and all of the editors and the contributors, it's a brave book, it's a wise book, and it's a book that's deeply committed to social justice and a better world. So thank you.